At its most philosophical, this video is about the question of, is it better to do something good, something morally virtuous, or is it better to be fair? To be fair and consistent. Because sometimes, if we want to be fair, it's going to prevent us from doing something we perceive to be virtuous. If I help just one student in my classroom when I'm a teacher, if I help just a few students that I select out of my hundreds of students, can't I be accused of favoritism? And I can say back, hey, I'm doing something virtuous. I'm helping this student who needs the help, and maybe you didn't ask for help, or I can't help everyone. I have 300 students. I just picked these few and I'm helping them. Yeah, but is it more important to do something virtuous, or is it more important to be fair? My name is Aizal Mazard. That in the background is a very realistic toy representing Socrates. I'm making the transition to doing kind of a weekly political analysis show here. But this is one story I didn't think would fit into a News of the Week style episode. The news coming out of Europe, at its least philosophical, is about the tough talk from French President Emmanuel Macron that Europe is no longer naive. Europe is no longer jejune in its foreign policy towards China, in its economic policy towards China. Europe is now talking tough about China as never before. And none of the newspaper articles I saw actually quoted, analyzed, or discussed the 10-point action plan that the European Union has now put forward in its economic-geopolitical conflict with China. Point one of that action plan, a plan that is, above all else, an insult to the meaning of the word action in English. End of digression. Point one says that Europe is going to demand that China live up to some unstated standard of human rights. Now, here's the problem. There may be a sort of ethical conflict in my role as a teacher if I reach out to and help some students and not others, favoritism. But Europe is not the world's teacher. Europe is not the tutor to the world in human rights or democracy. And if it wanted to be, it would raise real questions of ethical consistency and fairness. At the same time, absolutely simultaneously with this sort of toothless and vague demand that Europe has made for China to live up to some standard of human rights, is a much harder to resist form of economic suasion being imposed upon Cambodia, the tiny, poverty-stricken, powerless country of Cambodia, that Cambodia ought to live up to European standards of democracy. Now, my point here is not that it would be immoral for Cambodia to become a democracy. No. Not my perspective at all. However, I'm troubled that in the year 2019, in a transitional period when basically the world has become disaffected with neoliberalism, but no particular ideology has replaced neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is in this long twilight period, especially since the year 2008, when nobody believes in it anymore, but there's nothing else around, as even just a set of pragmatic guiding principles for Western powers. Nobody knows what the game plan is. Well, without any game plan, the game being played seems to consist of bullying small, powerless countries like North Korea, Cuba, and Cambodia, while large and economically powerful countries like Saudi Arabia and China face no consequences for what are fundamentally the same problems. And again, I've been a school teacher. I was teaching English in a university classroom in China. And I remember there was one student who was born deaf. And I said to her, look, let's take the time. I'll give you some special tutoring. You were born hearing impaired. She had some kind of surgery to improve her hearing or something. I can meet with you and I can help you with pronouncing these words properly because you're having problems other students are not going to have. Never did a student stand up and object and say, hey, this one student is getting special treatment for no justifiable reason. And the reason for that is, of course, it was justifiable. This was a student with special needs, and I was making a special effort. And everyone there recognized it. you are not really going to get the same kind of ethical justification for why the lack of democracy in Cambodia is punishable with these consequences, and not the lack of democracy in China or Saudi Arabia. Now, Europe has its own self-interest. The economy of Europe is not going to suffer if Europe now takes basically punitive economic measures against Cambodia, measures that will definitely make Cambodia a poorer country. Cambodia will suffer consequences, and Europe will not. By contrast, if the same sorts of measures were imposed on China, if there were punitive economic measures, basically obstacles to trade were created between Europe and China, there would not only be economic consequences for China, there would be very great consequences for Europe. We can say the same about Saudi Arabia because, of course, the value of Saudi Arabia's oil exports, the downstream impacts to the economy for that are very, very great. Indeed, what would happen to Europe if they all decided that for the sake of human rights, for the sake of democracy, they would stop using cellular phones that were manufactured in China? That might be a real and meaningful sacrifice, and it might test people's commitment to the ideology of democracy and human rights. If it's not worth using a slightly more expensive cellular phone, what is it worth? On the other hand, nobody in Europe will notice if Cambodian rice disappears from the grocery stores or, fully manufactured goods exported from Cambodia. Cambodia actually does have quite a big garment industry. There are people right now in Europe who are wearing winter coats that are stitched in factories in Cambodia. Shoes also. You may not even know it if you didn't check the label. But yeah, some of those goods. But those goods can, of course, be made all over the world. Europe is not going to go cold in the middle of winter because they no longer have ski jackets that are stitched in the factories of Phnom Penh, Cambodia. So there's a problem here. And people react to the problem as a form of hypocrisy. So I have to ask, punitive actions taken by Europe, taken by the United States of America, in the name of human rights and democracy, is this moral? Is this virtuous in and of itself? And then if it is, if you think, yeah, trade policy and even maybe military intervention, trade policy at the least, if you think it should be used as a carrot and stick form of incentivization to try to force the whole world to measure up to certain minimum standards of democracy and human rights, then the next question becomes, why is it only some students in the classroom that the teacher is singling out for whipping? Why is it only the students who don't have rich parents who can arrange to have the teacher whipped in return? Yeah, I'm stretching the allegory, but I think you know what I mean. If it is not worth it to Europe to take some risk, to face some consequences of its own in imposing economic sanctions on others in the name of democracy and human rights, then I would say to you, Europe's ideology of democracy and human rights is nothing worth. It is apparently not even worth the inconvenience of trying to get a cellular phone manufactured somewhere outside of China. Maybe somewhere like right here where I am right now in Taiwan.